guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we will be talking about Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. Now Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius starts at a military base where the main military guy is trying to figure out what plane is flying in outer space. And the general says, "Is it one of our own?" And then the other guy says, "Our flights have nothing scheduled." And then the general says, "We got ourselves a bogey." So they, so the so the military crew end up flying by Jimmy Neutron, and Jimmy Neutron and his best friend Carl are trying to shoot a toaster into space because last night Jimmy got a transmission from some aliens, and so he wanted to send a message back to them. So Carl does end up throwing it, but there's a little hiccup. Jimmy's rocket ends up bouncing a little bit, but he ends up getting right back on track and he doesn't end up blowing up. So, af- so after after he does the transmission, he says, "Oh, just a quick stop at my house." But before this, the military did try to catch up to him though, but he just said, "Got a blast," and then he just lost them. He just lost the military. Like, it didn't even faze him. He just lost all the ships that were chasing after him. So after that happens, he says, "Just a quick stop at my house," and then Carl tells him, "I don't know, Jimmy. You promised that you that we would get to school on time, and I have got to get to school on time." So Jimmy ends up launching Carl out of the rocket and giving him a parachute to actually get to school. And then Jimmy gets to his house where his parents were having breakfast, but Jimmy ends up breaking up the chimney on the roof and it ends up falling off again. So his mother comes out of the house and she says, "James Isaac Neutron," and then Jimmy tries to hide in the rocket, but then his mother says, "I see you up there. How many times do we have to tell you not to launch yourself off the roof?" And then Jimmy says, 9 times. Exactly 9. Because sometimes when you repeat something, it is good for a developing brain. And so he tells his parents about the message that he got from outer space, and his mother tells him again that if me and your father haven't met these people, they are strangers. And so Jimmy comes down with Goddard's assistance from the roof because Goddard can fly Jimmy off the roof. So he flew Jimmy off the roof, and then Jimmy got ready for school. And now, here's how Jimmy gets ready for school. He had the robot that dresses him, even a robot that brushes his teeth for him, and a robot to tie his shoes. Now, just for a quick summary here, you guys, I'm gonna make this a long summary, but back in the 2000s, there was the Jimmy Neutron show. And in the Jimmy Neutron show, he never had a robot to dress him or to brush his teeth. So I think they just add this. I think they just add. I, what I think happened is I think they just added this into the movie. So, after the robot helps him tie his shoes, he tries to run to the bus, but since the robot has tied his shoe in a knot, he ends up missing the bus, but he ends up taking his latest invention, the super bubble gum mobile. So basically it's a piece of bubble gum that can actually bounce on the street. And so Jimmy blows his so Jimmy Neutron blows the bubble with this bubble gum mobile bubble gum that he invented. And then when he catches up to the bus, he tells Libby and Sydney that Libby and Sydney that he's got it down this time. And his friends are making fun of him because he's traveling in bubblegum and not the bus. And then Jimmy says, "Bubblegum travel is the way of the future." And then he bumps into a tree, and then Libby and Libby and Sydney laugh, and they say, "Well, I guess trees are like the brakes." So Jimmy is stuck in a tree that Carl is stuck in as well, and they both get down. And then Carl says, "What a day, huh?" And then Jimmy says, "Look at the bright side, Carl. The worst is behind us." So when Sydney is, wait, so when Cindy is giving her report on the dinosaurs, her and Jimmy get into an argument that she copied her assignment off of another person's assignment back when they discovered dinosaurs. And I'm like sitting here saying to myself while they are arguing about this, like, how come Miss Fowl didn't tell them the correct research of the reports that they had to do for class? So anyway, we skip over to show and tell where Sheen shows Ultralord for the 7th week in a row. And he's and actually actually Sheen says, "Miss Fowl, this is different. He is a special kind of Ultralord that's never been seen in any tradition." So Cindy says, and what I was thinking as well, Cindy says, "Never been seen, huh? Well, how do you know it's even in there?" So he opens the box, and it turns out that the Ultra Lord is in there. But then he realized that he opens the box, and he goes, "No!" Oh, and after seeing there's Carl, he shows him his inhaler. But poor Carl, he actually sprays himself in the eye with his with his inhaler. The poor thing. And then and then and and, and then and, 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 and then while Miss Fowl is talking, Jimmy and Carl are are sharing pictures of their drawings. And then it is Jimmy's turn to show his showing tail. So he showed everybody his shrink ray. Now keep this in mind because this will come back later. So he actually showed everybody his shrink ray, his latest invention that can shrink things. So he points it at Sydney to shrink her because because actually Cindy said a joke and she said, "What's the matter, Neutron? Aren't you short enough already?" And so when he pointed at her, it doesn't work. And then and then and and then Sydney and then Sydney actually mocks Jimmy and says, help me, I'm so tiny, just like Jimmy's brain." And so Miss Fowl actually tells the kids that that's not very nice, but Jimmy is just so disappointed that it didn't work, but it worked fine this morning when he tried it, he said to Carl. And then Jimmy says it's probably just a programming error. And then it does end up working on Miss Fowl because it shrinks her. And she actually gets eaten, almost gets eaten by a worm that she had in that apple that she has on her desk. So, walking home, Carl tried to cheer Jimmy up by saying, "Oh, come on, Jimmy. At least some of the great adventures you know, um, started out as complete, um, started as complete failures too." And then Jimmy says, "Oh, thank you, Carl. I feel better, I think." And then Carl says, "I'm glad." And then they see the flyer for Retroland theme park, the grand opening. And they all want to go, but they realize that their parents won't let them out on a school night. So the cool guy Nick, the cool guy in their class, and who everyone had the crush on. Oh yeah. I forgot to tell you. Um, in the Jimmy Neutron movie and in the show, there's this cool guy named Nick that every girl had the crush on, and Sydney had the big crush on him. So Nick tells them that they should sneak out, and then Jimmy says, "Nick, sneaking out is just so barbaric, and I don't even think my parents will let me go if I ask." And then Nick says, whatever Neutron, but there's only one opening night, and everybody who matters is gonna be there. And then he skates his way home. Nick skates his way home. So, after doing some thinking about it, Jimmy comes up with a plan that all we need to do is actually butter our parents up, and then they'll let us go. All we need to do is give them compliments, give them stuff that they like, and then they'll probably let us go. And then Jimmy says, I'll call you guys tonight. We go to Retroland tonight. And then he uses his rocket backpack to get home. And then he checks on all the experiments. The the girl eating plant, the invisible hamster wheel, and a burping soda formula that gives you every burp per sip. Oh, and this is here where we meet his dog, Goddard. Well, we meet him in the first opening. He's a robotic dog that Jimmy built himself. And Jimmy actually brought him some aluminum to chew on, and he actually made like a necklace and some diamond earrings, and he got some roses from his mom that the mom, Judy, is working on Hugh's car. And then, after she is done working on the car, Jimmy's mother asked him how was show and tell today. And then Jimmy gives her the roses and the earrings and the flowers and says, Happy birthday. And he gives her the diamond earrings and he says, Here you go, Mom. And then Judy points out that it's not her birthday. And Judy is actually surprised that Jimmy made like a diamond earring and some pearls. Like, are you surprised, Judy? Your son's a genius. Are you really surprised? So he asks his mom if he may go to Retroland tonight, and she says no, because tonight is a school night. And then, when she says no, and says maybe we could go next weekend, and then Jimmy says, but everybody who is gonna matter is gonna be there, Mom. And then Judy says, you matter and your father matters and Goddard matters. But you're not going. Maybe we can go next weekend. So he looks through his rocket backpack for something to give his mom so that can change her mind. And he actually sets the couch pillow that's sitting on the couch on fire, and then he uses God, and then he uses Goddard as a fire extinguisher. And then his mom said that he is grounded because they have been telling him time and time again about playing with rockets. And then and and then Jimmy says, well, it's technically not a rocket. It's more of a jetpack type thing. And then his mom says, I don't care what type of thing it is. You just climb those stair type things right now, and your father will have a few words to say to you when he gets home. Oh, and by the way, poor Judy is covered in like foam that they have in the fire extinguishers, foam. She is covered in foam. Oh, meanwhile, back in space, it turns out that the aliens did get Jimmy's message, and now they are on their way to space to collect all the adults that they can so they can feed it to their chicken Poldra. So, after So, after Jimmy's dad talks to him, Goddard Goddard gives him some options, and actually one of the options is for him to sneak out. So he does exactly that, and he calls Carl and Sheen and tells them to sneak out, and that he will meet them at Retroland in 1 hour. So his shrink ray does actually work, and so Jimmy actually so so Jimmy actually so so Jimmy actually so so Jimmy actually shrinks himself down, and then when his parents are talking, Jimmy actually puts the remote in himself on the couch for just like half a minute, and his father grabs the shrink ray, and then he and then he and then and then he and and then he shrinks the TV, but then he unshrinks it, and then he and and then he actually shrinks Judy's head, and then he unshrinks it, and he tells Judy, like, he remembers being a kid and not being able to go to his best friend's party, and he actually says that he actually stuck out to go, and then his mom tells Hugh, you don't think that Jimmy, and then and 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 then Hugh says, oh no. Besides, how can he sneak out? It's not like he can just walk right out the front door. And with this, Hugh ends up kicking Jimmy out the front door through the doggy door, actually. And he actually and he is actually going to Retroland. He is actually on his way to Retroland with the shrink ray remote in hand so he can turn himself back to normal size. It is here where 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 we actually see Cindy doing some Tai Chi. And we actually see Libby choosing a song for her ringtone. Choosing a song as her ringtone. Oh, and actually, Libby is actually one of my favorite characters. So, after this, they get to Retroland, they ride the rides, and Sheen actually meets Ultra Lord. Just like they have been talking about. They talked about how they were going to ride the ride to meet Ultra Lord and touch a llama. And Carl ends up touching a llama. So, on their way back home, they make a wish on a. So, on their way back home, they make a wish on a shooting star, wishing for no more parents. And this actually comes true because while they were at the Retroland grand opening, all the parents got kidnapped by aliens. So the next day, everybody wakes up with the same letter on their fridge that says, "Dear son / daughter, we have gone to Florida on the extended vacation. Love, your parents." And then it turned out that every kid got this letter, and Jimmy actually gets Goddard to scan for adult life forms. And there are no adult life forms to scan for. So they are all excited and all happy. So they all have a big party and do whatever they want. Like going to the ice creams, like 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 going to the ice cream parlor and actually messing up the ice cream parlor, letting out the cold in the refrigerator, and going out in public and actually going out in public with their clothes not matching. And Jimmy actually pulled the prank on Sydney on on wait on Cindy and actually gives her the girl eating plant, and she actually thinks it's from Nick, but the plant ends up scaring her, and she actually ends up running out of the house. Well, Cindy actually ends up running back into the house. And so, when the day is over with no parents, everybody is feeling sick to their stomachs. and everybody is starting to miss their parents. So it turned out that Sheen told everyone that their parents had been abducted by aliens. And so everyone comes to Jimmy's house saying, "Do you know what happened to our parents?" And and remember the popular boy Nick? Well, actually, the popular boy Nick ended up grabbing Sheen and told and actually told and, and actually told Jimmy, "Hey, Neutron, Ultra Lord here, so do you really know what happened to our parents?" So Jimmy explains that their parents are in space and that they are gonna go rescue them. So they get all the rides from Retroland, and they pack a bag with snacks and waters, and they are going off into outer space to save their parents. And so before and before they make it to outer space, they have this moment where Carl says, "You know, Jimmy, we should have never wished on that star, 'cause I really miss my parents." And then Jimmy says, "Come on, you guys, we got to keep our heads. We'll find them." And so in the next scene, they are they are off in outer space, and they actually found it, and they actually found where the aliens were at. So they're out there to where the aliens are at. Right. They're out there. So Nick says, "You get us to those aliens, and I will take it from there. I will show I I will show those aliens that I am not anyone to mess with." And so Jimmy agrees. And so Nick is actually hanging back until Jimmy can contact him about about where the parents are. And then it turned out that the parents are going to be sacrificed to Poltra, a giant chicken. So, before this happens, all the kids get captured by the guards, and the king and, and the king of the aliens say so the king of the aliens say, "Look at the little rescue party. Oh, how cute." And 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 this is when Libby actually says, "What have you done with our parents? Where are they?" And and King Goobot explains that your your parents are gonna be sacrificed by the mighty Poltra because they have this commercial going on, And they all say it's thanks to Jimmy Neutron because he sent that message at the beginning of the movie. And so the aliens tell him, without the coordinates you gave us, we never would have found your little planet in the first place. And so, with Jimmy being sad that he put his friend's parents in danger and his parents in danger, he actually gets a sail all to himself, and the kids actually get thrown in the dungeon. But Sydney actually tells him that there are a lot of kids who need you, and I do too. So put your big brain to work. And usually Cindy is mean to him, so I really like this moment right here. Side note, in the show, it turned out that they have a big crush on each other. Side note, in the show, again, it turns out they got a big crush on each other. So it turned out that Jimmy actually so it turned out that Jimmy actually so it turned out that Jimmy actually uses Lippy's cell phone to call Goddard, and while Goddard is being taken apart by another alien, him and Jimmy actually set up a plan so Goddard can explode and scare the alien to death, so he can end up running away and not taking Goddard apart. And so the plan actually works until he gets to Jimmy's cell. And then, with the guard there, Goddard actually plays dead while opening the cell for everybody to escape. So, Jimmy and his friends end up escaping. And then it turned out that Nick actually beats up the guards that are guarding the ceremony so no kids can get in. And then Cindy says, "My hero." And then it turned out that the mighty Poltra, the big chicken, it turns out that he is hatched, right? It turns out that he's hatched. And so it turned out that he comes out of the egg, and then Nick screams, and then he runs away, and then he ends up in a fetal position. I'm like, poor Nick. And then she says, "Okay, we're gonna need another plan, probably a Nicholas one." And then after that, and then and 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 then after that, Jimmy gives them a motivational speech about how they are gonna take down these aliens together because they took their parents. And then they all work together using their show and tell and using everything they got to defeat the aliens. And it worked. And Sheen actually gets the ship, and Goddard and Jimmy actually get the remote to control the parents so they can go to the ship, which Sheen is driving. And he felt so nervous about it. But Sheen actually got the ship. He hit the chicken so the chicken went down. And And Sheen actually got the ship, and he hit the chicken, so the chicken went down, and all the parents got onto the ship, and they all flew home. But before this, Jimmy had an incoming message from King Goobot saying how little and tiny he was and how he was never gonna get his parents back. So him and Goddard fly on Fly Cycle, and they get very big when they reach King Goobot's ship, and then Jimmy blows King Goobot away with his mouth by doing, and then King Goobot ends up getting blown away. He his his ship actually ends up being blown away in space, and he ends up looking like an egg at the end of the movie, and his brother and King Goobot's brother Uba says, "You look wonderful sunny side up, sire." And that's no joke. So, 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 so Sheen ends up flying to Jimmy's other ear, and they end up rescuing the parents, and Jimmy ends up apologizing to his parents for not listening to them. And he says, I thought I was smart enough to do everything on my own, that I didn't need you guys, but I was wrong. I love you guys. And they say, we love you too, Jimmy. Now, having a son who's the genius may not always be easy, but it sure is interesting. And his dad says not every family gets to ride on a spaceship on the way back home, and then they say together that is pretty neat, and then they all laugh. And then at the end, Jimmy and Carl are having breakfast, and then Carl tries and then Carl tries to spray the eggs with his inhaler, but Jimmy tells Carl that it's all right, Carl, it's just breakfast. And then it turns out that Judy finds the burping soda, so she takes a sip, and it turns out that that she is burping like crazy. And then the dad comes in from mowing the lawn, and then he takes a sip of the soda, and then Jimmy's mom reads the soda, and she finds out that it is burping soda, and then she says, James, Isaac, Neutron, and then they both end up laughing. And then they all end up laughing in the house, in the kitchen, at breakfast time. And it turned out that Goddard is chasing a bird. And that is the end of the movie. Bye, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye. Oh, and before I go, who is your favorite character from Jimmy Neutron? Put it in the comments. Again, who is your favorite character from the Jimmy Neutron movie or show? Put it in the comments. Bye, and see you guys in my next video. Bye.